Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when it's finds you. Well, as I told you for some time now, I was going to do a video on how Christians justified slavery. And I know I said on the video that I started the year off that I wasn't going to do any long videos for a while. So I don't know how long I'm going to talk on this one. I haven't got my notes together. Well, they've been together. It's just a matter of recording notes and my personal thoughts as well. And as I've stated, I have plenty of content. I have videos already recorded. It's just taking them through the process of getting the images and everything, doing the edits and all that before I release it. I have about 30 videos recorded already. And, I feel like going back through them right now to see what I was talking about. So I'll eventually get around to getting those finalized and put out one day. And, I'm not in a hurry because I still got a lot of other stuff that I can talk about. But as I stated, this one's going to be basically how the Christian church justified slavery. And because for the longest, I tried to wrap my head around some of the scriptures that I was reading, like over in Colossians, I believe, chapter 3, and maybe Ephesians 6. And, I know Ephesians 6 was one that always troubled me, where it says, slaves, obey your masters. And I'm going to talk about that scripture because practically all of the Bibles you're reading from today were actually revised in the 19th century, in 1800s. And even your authorized 1611 version of the King James Bible was redone in the 19th century. So we're not getting a pure word, I should say. And I know all of you have read in the Bible, or you heard your pastor say it from the pulpit, that you are not supposed to add or subtract from God's word. And unfortunately, that's exactly what these biblical scholars have done. They added and they took away. I mean, they took away a whole bunch of books. And they changed the meaning. When you change a few words in a phrase, it can mess up the whole meaning of the phrase. And there was a guy, I think he was an evangelical, named Walter Wink. And he said something. He wrote a book. What's the name of that book? Oh, I can't think of the book right now, but I take my own quotes when I'm reading. I take my own quotes out of the book I'm reading. But Walter Wink said, the polarization is such that the conservatives on this side have their prayer meeting and their choir meeting, and the liberals on this side have their prayer meeting and their choir meeting, and the two sides never get together and talk about it. The result is the tearing apart of the fabric of the body of Christ. And you see, for many blacks who refuse Christianity, I totally understand now. See, the Roman Catholic Church started conquering the world in the name of Jesus. They felt like it was their duty to force people to convert to their version of the Bible called Christianity. And remember, I said we really never broke away or protested from the Roman Catholic Church, although that's what we've been taught for centuries. As I mentioned before on other videos, the Protestant church still looks exactly like the Catholic Church. There's something in the book of Matthew, chapter 13, called a parable of the weeds. And it actually talks about the farmer planting his wheat seeds, and when he was asleep, someone sowed some weeds in his fields called tares. And the farmer was asked by his workers if he wanted them to pull out the weeds, and he said, wait for everything to come up together, and then it will be easier to separate the two. So although Protestants supposedly broke away, we still maintain a lot of the same practices. Some of the folks who left the Catholic Church were still growing under the influence of the Catholic Church. And in doing so, they kept teaching us the same faulty doctrines that had been taught. They learned from tares who were teaching, and they became tares themselves. And they're around here teaching the wheat. The tares are teaching the wheat. And see, that mentality has still kept a stronghold on today's Protestant churches. How can a Roman Catholic Church, the Church of England, the Orthodox Church, Islam, the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, and many other denominations all teach different ideologies and all proclaim to be waiting on the same Messiah or Jesus? Because some other ones outside of what we term Christianity are waiting on Jesus too. Now, if they're all waiting on the same Jesus, and the Roman Catholic Church is responsible for trying to colonize and convert the entire world to follow their doctrine, how did we move away from it? And why are we still following it? Not too long ago, Pope Francis called a world meeting for religious leaders to come together as one. And just a few weeks ago, he just said it's okay for same-sex unions. So the Roman Catholic Church is still influencing all religions right today. Pope Francis didn't go to another part of the world to teach this. They all went to him. So what does that tell you? Christianity is a European creation. And it was not what black people followed before Europeans came to their shores. Black tribes followed many different things before Europeans arrived. There were some blacks who did follow the Bible long before they had visitors to the west coast of Africa. It wasn't Christianity though. It was something called the Way, W-A-Y. And those who practiced the things in the Bible were called followers of the Way. And the people were called Nazarene or Mashiachim. Now, if we understand the roots of Christianity and who really started it, it makes sense as to why Pope Francis gathered so-called religious leaders to promote the one world religion that is to be forthcoming. And I mean, speaking of one world religion, I saw something the other day, and it was saying we're sitting around here waiting on the one world religion, but Christianity, when it was created, became the one world religion. I mean, who do you think created the first seminary? Which Christian denomination was the first to own slaves? Which Christian denomination never punished their leaders for molestation? Which denomination said that their leaders could not marry? Which denomination first said baptism was not required and getting a little water sprinkled on you would suffice? So if this was accepted as Christianity and the Protestant movement became a thing when they broke away, why did Protestants basically mimic everything they supposedly broke away from? Why do our modern Protestant churches have only one person stand on the stage and do all of the teaching at every gathering? The pulpit elevates the clergy to a position of prominence. What did slavery do? It placed the slave master in a position of prominence. One in charge, and everybody else listened and followed the dictates of that one person. And that wasn't just for the slave, that was for the slave master's wife too. That was for the slave master's children too. So one in charge and everybody else listened and followed the dictates of that one person. And see, based on the way they treated them women, their wives, that's why their wives were sleeping with the male slaves too. Because they were being treated like stepping stools by their slave master husbands. Now, if we go back through history, we'll see how the slave master was considered great in society. And I'm going to get into some of that with all these great men out there. And looking back in history and today, we see how one man in each pulpit is revered in society. Every church gathering is supposed to have multiple speakers. Well, let me rephrase that. Every assembly gathering, because church and assembly are two distinct opposites. Christianity gave us the church, the way gave us assembly. Now, that's in place, the multiple teachers, is because if someone is teaching error, there is someone there who could immediately correct that person so the people would not be led astray and leave the assembly confused. Why does the Protestant church believe that the congregation has to financially support the teacher so he doesn't have to work and take care of himself? See, in Malachi 3, we've been lied to all of our lives about who the writer in Malachi was speaking to. The writer in Malachi was speaking to the priest. He was not speaking to the people. In 2 Thessalonians 3, who was the writer talking to? He was talking to the priest, not the people. And if memory serves me correctly, I believe in both of those chapters, I think the verses are around 8 through 10. That's Malachi 3, 2 Thessalonians 3 as well, I believe. And see, the original gatherings were in homes or open air spaces. And people would actually, if the assembly got too big, sometimes they would break off and go to another home. Sometimes they would actually build and make additions to their homes to accommodate the extra people. And then open air spaces were when you had a traveling teacher come in, all of the people that had broke off into a separate home, they came together in that one location and they made sure to keep the information pure. Go to a preacher conference today, go to a church conference today, and see if anybody are teaching the same thing that's being taught at the church you attend. I bet they ain't. So how do we come to the place where we copied the same thing that the Catholic Church did? Why does the Protestant Church give communion instead of having a supper? Because it's called the Lord's Supper. Where did the practice of a wafer and a sip of juice come from? With all of the money the churches collect, why doesn't the church have a Lord's Supper every Sunday? Even though Sunday means are not biblical either. Why do many of your Protestant preachers wear robes? You see, most of your reformers were former priests, conditioned and trained in Catholic ideology. And they felt that people couldn't know God or grow spiritually unless they heard preaching. See, that's one of the biggest scams out there. I mean, think about what I'm doing in these videos and think about what others are doing in their videos. Are any of us preaching? No. But we teaching you. And see, preaching is a big scam now. You know, how could Catholic priests justify slavery? Well, since the priests didn't want to work, and they convinced the people to give their shekels, silver, denarii, and gold to support them, and they made others who didn't come to the chapel work to take care of them, and it wasn't a stretch, I should say. How many different accounts have we come across where it said a slave could be free if, and only if he or she became a Christian? I mean, I got another video I plan on doing on that. Start talking about Portugal and Spain and a lot of that thought process that's going on in them Catholic churches over there too. And but that's not for this video. This video is going to have enough length to it itself. So Protestants actually adapted the same thought process that others should financially support them so they wouldn't have to take their lazy butts to work. You know, how can I say that? Well, you heard me mention Malachi 3 and 2 Thessalonians. God, well, y'all call him God. I used to call him God too. I call him Yah now because he has a name. I did a video a few weeks ago on what's his name. Is his name important? And if you really want to know if his name is important, I go back and listen to that video. But see, Yah knew many men who went into the pulpit were really not interested in saving souls. They were interested in enhancing their lifestyle at the expense of the people, and they used the gospel as the means to do it. See, Yah's word says the head of the home should receive his compensation before anybody else in 2 Timothy 2:6. With that being said, how did the priests and pastors usurp Yah's word and tell the people that they're supposed to give to the church first? Can you see how the clergy was promoting slavery in the name of Yah? See, a verse like, even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. See, that's 1 Corinthians 9:14. But see, pastors use a play on word. It says that they that preach the gospel should live of the gospel, meaning their lives should mirror the Bible. That doesn't mean they should be paid for teaching the gospel. It means their lives should mirror the Bible. It should be, their lives should represent biblical living. But see, pastors translate that to living financially off the gospel. See, 20th century Eastern Orthodox priest Alexander Shaman said that in the process of replacing the old religion, Christianity became a religion. 19th century pastor Philip Schaff said, as the Savior of the world was born in a stable and ascended to heaven from a mountain, so his apostles and their successors down to the 3rd century preached in the streets, the markets, on mountains, in ships, sepulchres, eaves, deserts, and homes of the converts. But how many thousands of costly churches have been and chapels have been since been built and are constantly being built in all parts of the world under the crucified Redeemer, who in the days of his humiliation had no place of his own to rest his head. Shirley J. Case said not only was the social environment of Christianity largely Gentile well before the end of the 1st century, but it had severed all social bonds of social contact with Jewish Christians. By the year 100, Christianity was a Gentile religious movement. And I'm going to say right there, I've been accused of being a Hebrew roots person because I've been talking about the Hebrew roots of the Bible. And when people call me that, they're saying it and meaning it in a derogatory manner. But these people are following Roman roots of the Bible. But they're not ready to have that conversation with me, because when I ask them what does Hebrew roots mean, I don't ever get an answer. But by the year 100, Christianity was a Gentile religious movement. And isn't it amazing that the Apostle John is said to have died around AD 100? Now, if you have a problem with these videos I've recently been releasing, I just ask that you go into prayer and do your own research before you think ill of me and what I'm teaching. I didn't create this Christian oppressive environment. I'm just exposing it and sharing it with you. And as I stated earlier, most of what we've been taught in Christianity has come from teachings of people who did a whole lot of things in the name of Jesus. That's why I don't follow a religion anymore, because religion ain't even in the Bible anyway. Christianity ain't in the Bible. The word Christian and Christianity ain't in the Bible. No, it's in the modern Bibles because they messed with the words. They control the printing press. It's a manipulation tool now. You say, I follow the Bible. Am I perfect? I'm not even close to perfect. But a whole lot of people will not make a decision like that because they don't want to upset their church, family, and friendship. Hey, I get it. You see, that's why blacks can be justified in saying that Christianity is a white man's religion. I mean, I've heard that for years about black people, Christianity is a white man's religion. And I say, well, my response has always been, well, it might be a white man's religion, but black folks had the Bible before them. If you study your Bible and you understand who the 12 tribes were, the 12 tribes were the smallest people in numbers out of any other people on earth at the time. But they were instructed to take the gospel to everyone else, not be influenced by everyone else. And the exact opposite happened of what was supposed to happen. The Hebrew tribes were supposed to do the teaching. The Gentile tribes took the teaching and twisted it up. That's why we got this mess we got today. And now that descendants of Hebrew tribes are trying to get people back to what the Bible was, now the Gentiles, the other nations, are getting pissed off because now all of their religion is being shattered, is being shot, poked holes in, because ain't no truth in it. So you can't get upset with black folks for believing Christianity was a white man's religion, especially when slave masters were using the same Bible to justify enslaving black folks. I mean, who are the true Gentiles? On May 3rd, 1946, Albert Einstein said this: "The separation of the races is not a disease of colored people, but a disease of white people. I do not intend to be quiet about it." See, that's why I mentioned that many black people who follow the practice of the Bible are called followers of the way. The way wasn't a religion, it was a way of life. And I did a video on that a while back, and I gave you all those scriptures out of the Bible where it enforced the way. The way. And what did the Messiah say? I am the way. Ain't no Christianity in the way. Well, Christianity gets in the way of the way. And that's why your Christians having a hard time breaking away from their indoctrination. You've been indoctrinated. Hey, I was there too. I was taught that the man in the pulpit was, he's God's representative. And then when I started reading the Bible, I realized once I became a new creature, I became God's representative. I became a representative of God too, or of Yah too. The way wasn't a religion. It was a way of life. See, according to Frank Viola, much of what we do for church was lifted right out of pagan culture in a post-apostolistic period. See, I'm just giving you some foundation right now before I get into my topic. And Frank Viola, I have to really thank Frank Viola on some of this stuff too. Because years ago, I was just on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or there's another site I use, order books from Alibris. And Frank Viola's book, Pagan Christianity, popped up. And I said, that's an interesting title. And just based on the title, I ordered the book. And man, it was so much information in there. And so, Frank Viola gets his props from me. You see, priests and pastors call giving of your labor tithes when you come to church. And when you didn't come to church and give tithes, they enslaved you in order to get free labor. So y'all got to study this stuff. If you didn't freely give your money, they would enslave you. And see, the mere fact that we got people still giving churches tithes show that none of these people are reading their Bibles. None of them. Tithes ain't never been money. And I mentioned to you before, every time, I talk to somebody and they want to tell me about tithing, and they, I say, well, what happened to tithing being herbs and fruits and vegetables, and giving the 10th of your animal, not the first of your animal, but it always had to be if you had an increase in your herd. And they always say, well, you know, it wasn't no money back then when it was produce. And I have to always ask, have you read the book of Genesis? Have you read the book of Deuteronomy? I think Deuteronomy 14:22 tell you if your produce was too far and your produce was too heavy to carry, you were supposed to sell it for money. Like Jimmy Walker said on that commercial, money. And go have a feast with your family. But don't forget about taking care of the Levite, the Levitical priest. So there was money. Your pastors lied to you about there wasn't no money in the Bible because your pastors love fleecing you. And you too ignorant to go and study it for yourself. So if they enslaved people, they didn't give them monetary tithes. And see, if you didn't want to be a slave, they would convert you. And then they would tell you that now you needed to pay tithes if you didn't want to be a slave. You see how that works? And before you go all crazy, you need to find out what was the background of a lot of your priests back then. See, Martin Luther had some statements about that group of people. Why would Martin Luther talk about that group of people as he broke away from the Catholic Church, supposedly? How oppressive were some churches? Some churches would levy a fine on children for smiling in church. You hear that? They got fined if they smiled in church. You got to pay the church for smiling. Like I mentioned in the video once before, you know, they said, a fine is just the cost you pay is the legal cost you pay of something that was wrong. Or something, I can't remember exactly how I see it. But a fine is just something has been made legal for a price. That's what it is. So the churches were telling children they were basically not able to have a sense of enjoyment when they were worshiping and learning about Yah. And then in some churches there was something called a tithing man. Tithing man. I mean, this is a serious topic I'm getting into, but I mean, I have to laugh at this stupid stuff these churches were promoting and still promoting. But they had something called a tithing man. And his role was actually to go around and poke parishioners who would fall asleep in church. I mean, that sounds like slavery too. And today, although they might not poke you, they're called ushers. See, if a slave wasn't working up to satisfaction and not working hard enough, they would be hit with a whip. And it was a ploy to make sure congregants, had submission forced upon them. I mean, what's different in slavery? Hey, study this stuff for yourself. Puritans who missed Sunday worship were punished too. And they will receive a fine if they miss church. These folks were so criminal that they said, you gonna pay us even if you don't show up. I think Michael Jackson has a song called Smooth Criminal. Pay the church if you don't come. See, what they were saying is that whether you attend church or not, you gonna give them that money. Like Jimmy Walker said, money. Today's Protestant and Pentecostal denominations, have broken away from the Catholic Church body, but hasn't broken away from the Catholic ideology. Now, compare your church service to the service at a Catholic church. Other than standing and sitting a lot more, the service is almost identical. The thought process is almost identical. The practices are almost identical. That's why I can say in a previous video that the Christian ideology has done very little to change the atmosphere on racism. See, changing the atmosphere is not part of the plan. Keeping people in bondage is. See, if the people started to break away from the church, these slave masters called pastors would have to find real employment. And Frank Viola says the pastor is an obstacle to every believer. I'm going to repeat that. He says the pastor is an obstacle to every believer. Now, you know, he said what I've been saying for years, and you know, the word pastor only shows up one time in the New Testament, and that's in Ephesians 4. And it's actually pastors, it's not pastor. You know, for a great deal of society, they love to have a person to lead them, and a pastorate capitalized on that fallen nature of man. See, the people wanted a mediator, and were given that within the Catholic Church with the confessional booths. And I told y'all why the confessional booth was created, to give traveling men relief on their travel. And what was prevalent in the Catholic Church a few years ago with them choir boys, them altar boys. And the priests were getting some relief. Hey, don't get mad at me for telling you the truth. We grown here. We not children no more. I say, but the people were led to believe that if they confessed their sins to a priest, then that priest could act on their behalf and go to Yah with their confessions. Now, what does 1 Timothy 2:5 say? Hold on a second. For there is one Father and one mediator between the Father and men, Yahushua. So, how did and why did the Catholic Church create that practice? And why did the people buy into it? Because they ain't read their Bibles. Right today, the people ain't read their Bibles. I remember years ago, this is 20, 25 years ago. I mean, I don't even understand because I was only like 2. But about 20, 25 years ago, I used to hear people tell me all the time, and no way back then at all did I have the awareness that I have now. I was much younger, you know, just doing my duty, going to church, you paying my tithes, coming home, go to work all week, get ready to go to church Sunday morning again, pay my tithes. I was a faithful tither. Oh, I was faithful tither. Church could count on my check every Sunday, faithfully. Cyprian of Carthage was the one who said bishops were only accountable to God, and anyone who separated from the bishop also separated himself from God. So do you see why the church is the way it is? And I haven't even got to the slave scriptures yet. You know, it would also be around this time that the people were taught that the bishop alone could forgive their sins. What did the Bible say? And see, what many of these men in the pulpit did was remove the people from a personal relationship with the Messiah and the Father. But I've been saying for years that we don't read our Bibles. See, when you become born again, the Bible says you have become a priest. That can be found in 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. It reads, "Coming to him a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God, or Yah, precious. You also as living stones are built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Yah through Yahushua." Now, where is your pastor and the priest in that? Nowhere. How many times does the Bible mention priest in the Old and New Testament? There are many. I think I did a video. I might have counted it. Was it 497 times? I don't remember. But how many times did the Bible mention? See, it's many. And how many times did the Bible mention the word pastor or pastor? 1. I spoke to you earlier. And it's pastors, plural. Pastors, plural. Just like every other title in that particular verse, doctors and teachers, they were all plural. See, many pastors will say shepherd and pastor are the same thing. No, it's not. Even after all the biblical translations of English, shepherd has never been changed to pastor after all of these centuries. And even when the word pastor was used in Ephesians 4, it was included with several other titles, as I just mentioned. When the word priest is used, it's always by itself. Look at the church structure. You have the head of the church is called a pope or bishop. You have a group of presbyters or pastors. And you have deacons in both systems. Now, in slavery, you have a slave master or owner. You have an overseer, and then you have slave catchers. Isn't it ironic how these two systems mirror each other? The bishop, pope, and slave master run things. The presbyter, pastor, and overseer tell what the rules are. And the deacons and slave catchers go out and bring the people into the system. See, it was the Emperor Constantine that organized the Catholic Church in what they call the diocese. And the diocese is in a reality based on its etymology. It's an administrative unit of the Roman Empire. Pope Gregory was the one who shaped the Catholic Church after Roman law. Shaped the Catholic Church after Roman law. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Rome later on. And you think we're doing things the biblical way? If the church was shaped after law? I think the Bible is all laws are supposed to be made off what's taught in the Bible, not the other way around. The government shouldn't be making laws to dictate the Bible. The Bible should be used to dictate the government laws. If we're still doing all the things the Catholic Church is doing, and all of their practices are following government dictates, are we really separate as church and state? Why do you get to write off your tithes on your tax form if you give it to a government-approved Christian organization? But you can't get a tax write-off if you do it the biblical way that the Messiah told us. See, why can't you get a tax write-off if you donated or gave a homeless person, let's say, $1,000 last year? What if you gave a family member who was struggling $5,000 last year? But you can't write it off. That's the biblical way to do things. Now, which one do most Christians participate in? The one looking for an earthly return, or the one looking for a heavenly return? See, the book of Matthew says you don't give with an expectation of an earthly return. See, y'all thought I'm off tangent, huh? and forgot about Rome, huh? Then said, no, I didn't. As I talk, a lot of times, a lot of other thoughts come to my head too. And so I just start saying whatever comes to my mind when I'm doing my videos. I don't do that in public with people, when I'm speaking in a forum or something like that. But I can do that on my videos. They're my videos. I don't do my videos to hurt anybody's feelings. I just do my videos to share with you some truth. And whether, like they always say, the church I was baptized and grew up in, when they would open up the doors of the church for somebody to join church, never understood why they did that when a lot of Sundays we didn't have no visitors. But, the deacons were standing up with the chairs up there, and, we extended an invitation, it's yours to accept or reject. And, so my videos are the same way. Later after you accept or reject it. But Will Durant was a historian and philosopher. And he said that when Christianity conquered Rome, the ecclesiastical structure of the pagan church, the title and investments of the Pontifex Maximus, and the pageantry of immemorial ceremony passed like maternal blood into the new religion, and captive Rome captured her conqueror. Now, under Constantine, the church was recognized and honored by the state. See, that's already a red flag. If the government is praising you, you in line with the government. In AD 313, Constantine exempted the church from paying taxes. And see, up until that time, that was only something that was enjoyed by pagans. And then, so y'all don't understand your history. He also exempted them from public office and having to perform civic duties. Well, I think most of your pastors don't do jack in the community. Because Constantine and exempted them. They make sure to do that. They say, it takes a lot to sit there and prepare a message. How much time you think it took me to prepare this? I did these notes a long time ago. I just decided to look at them today. Today is what, January? I started recording the January 11th. Today, January 12th. I just decided to look at them January 11th yesterday because I knew I had them. I just didn't remember where I put them. But they tell you they got, all week preparing a message. Hey, if you study the Bible, you can prepare your message within a couple of hours. I mean, most of your pastors only give you a message about 20 to 30, maybe 45 minutes at max. And they telling you to take a whole week on to prepare that. And they so scriptural and biblical. Most of the stuff ought to come off the top of your head. But they think they're supposed to be paid for that. They ain't visiting nobody in no hospitals. They ain't visiting nobody in no prisons. They ain't visiting nobody that's sick at home. But they want you to pay them. See, but with that Constantine mentality, why do you think the church as a whole hardly see most of the pastors actually doing anything outside of the pulpit? See, they've been placed at the top of the church hierarchy by government, which has actually excluded them from having to do what the Messiah said for them to do. And see, for far too long, we've seen this mentality from so-called church leaders. Under Constantine, all of a sudden there was a mass growth of men who said they were called to the ministry. Booker T. Washington told a story about that too. I think I mentioned that on a few videos once before, whatever, before. They called to the ministry because they lazy. They don't want to work. You don't need to go in front of no church congregation to say you've been called to preach. You don't need to do that. I always wondered growing up when, them preachers would get up there and say, I've been called to preach. Who called you? You got a direct phone line, to God, like I said, that's back then, I'm thinking back then, you got a direct phone line. I guess it's kind of like that same phone Richard Nixon used to call the astronauts on the moon. I just had to throw that in. But like I said, when Constantine made the decision, a lot of men decided they wanted to go into the ministry because they didn't want to work, they didn't want to perform nothing in the community, they just want to fleece people. And, during the time of Constantine, the clergy actually enjoyed privileges of the wealthy elite and privilege of a favored class of people. How many of you had access to your pastors, if your church has larger than 100 members? I mean, we're not going to talk about if your church has 500 members, 1,000 members. You ain't got no direct connection to the pastor then. So they're a set apart class. And see, with that, under Constantine came a certain status in society. Has anything changed? Many of your clergy are government officials, which is why not many of them fought back against the tyranny of the last 3 years, let alone the last 100. COVID-19! Many of your pastors are actually secretly compensated to get the congregation to fall in line with the system dictates. Even the whole practice of ordaining pastors and deacons is unbiblical. Now, did I say we don't have deacons? No, because in Timothy it says the qualifications of a deacon. And, although I believe the original text states qualities of an elder, nothing more, nothing less. See, the practice of ordination came right out of Roman law, when men got appointed to a civic office. See, when someone gets ordained, whether they know it or not, they have legally, under Roman law, been adopted into a caste system. You think we're not under Roman law here? Why does the Pope control your churches? Yeah, he controls the churches, believe it or not. And I think I might have mentioned before, well-known pastor up out of Dallas. I was listening to him one day, and I'm like, man, this dude is leading us back. Well, I don't attend his church, but I listened to him for years, and when I heard the message that day, I have not listened to him since. I said, this dude is so smooth. He's leading people right back into the Catholic system, and the people don't even realize it. And like I said, I used to listen to this dude on my way to work every morning at 8:30. Because I normally get my day started, depending on what part of the state I was working in. I would get my day started a lot of times by 4:30 in the morning. So by the time that 8 o'clock, 8:30 hour hit, I would be on my way to my second account for the day. And so 8:30 every morning, it was him. At 8 o'clock, it was another pastor out of Dallas, and I used to call it my power hour. And I mean, man, when I listened to them 30-minute messages every morning, man, you couldn't rain on my parade during the day. But somewhere along the way, something happened. Or was it always there? See, but you've been adopted into a caste system, one between professional clergy and the laity. And see, in the book, Church Order in the New Testament, and I'll mention a few books throughout this talk. I know my buddy Daryl, he loves when I talk about books, and I think Daryl will go and get him when I tell him about it. But in the book Church Order in the New Testament, author Edward Schweitzer said that Paul knew nothing about an ordination that confers ministerial or clerical powers to a Christian. See, we love to use the term pastor quite a bit now, but did you know the word pastor was hardly used until the 18th century? It wasn't even a thing. See, John Calvin was actually the first one who wanted to use the word pastor because he didn't like the word priest. That's interesting because Calvin is considered one of the reformers. See, the Bible uses the word priest, but Calvin didn't like it. That ought to tell you a whole lot right there. Yeah. Teachers of the Bible don't like what's in the Bible. Your teachers of the Bible don't like what's in the Bible. Calvin didn't like the word priest. But even though Calvin didn't like it, it still took 4 centuries for it to become a mainstream word to refer to the lead performer in the church concert. The pulpit. And we wonder why some atheists have a field day with Christianity. Christians don't even know many of its own origins. It's why I don't call myself a Christian anymore. Even Martin Luther said that God speaks through the preacher because he also believed in a caste system. That's caste, C-A-S-T-E, meaning the set-apart group. And I did a video 2-3 years ago, colorism in the caste system or something like that, and talking about that in the black community, how we have that caste system going on. Luther said the church should never assemble unless God's word is preached or prayer is made. Did you read that in any of your Bibles? Like I mentioned before, I got 11 or 12 Bibles. I'm not even talking about the digital Bibles I have that I don't even have physical copies of. I got a Basura digital copy. I got a Dewey Reams digital copy. And I think the Dewey Reams might be a 1582 version. I have a King James 1610 version. Digital. Yeah. So all in all, I probably got about 12, 13, 14, 15 Bibles, something like that. Well, I got 12 physical ones. I know I got at least 3 or 4 digital ones that I don't have physical copies of. And so Luther said the church was a place only for people to go and hear preaching. Really? maybe that's why ecclesia means called out ones. It's supposed to be an assembly and not a church gathering. See, remember I mentioned robes earlier? Well, in Luke 20 and 46, the Messiah said to be aware of those who walk around in robes. That means the Messiah didn't trust men who wore robes to spread the gospel. And see, we're back to Constantine. He was the one who suggested that the clergy dress different than the people. Why was the government dictating the affairs of the church? We can still ask that question right today. Clement of Alexandria said the clergy should dress different from the people. Clement said that the church had now become a formal event and the clergy should wear white. Do you know where Clement got that from? He got it from Plato, who said white was the color of the gods. You know, here we go again. Plato believed in paganism. So why was Clement following what Plato was teaching? See, the reformers wanted a different color robe. So they chose black to be the new color. I did a video a while back, black is the new white. Man, it had nothing to do with this. But they wanted black robes. You know, it didn't take place immediately though. See, black was chosen because it was considered the color that professionals wore. And since the clergy were now considered professional men of God, they wanted to adopt the same look as professionals such as attorneys. See, we don't understand, how bad this separatist system took place within the church. Even the ushers were in on it. Queen Elizabeth I was responsible for the ushers walking everyone to certain pews so that the people would not sit in the pews that were actually assigned to others, you know, those who gave a lot of money. See, the ushers were responsible for collecting the taxes. My bad. I mean, passing the collection plate and taking roll on who got communion. Because if you didn't put money in the plate, they wouldn't give you communion. Whew, Christianity is something else, I tell you. See, many of the church fathers were also pagan philosophers. And that's why, although they separated from Catholicism, the idolatrous practices continued. Peter Abelard, he lived from the year 1079 to 1142. And he is the person who gave us the word theology and the meaning it holds today. See, before Abelard, the meaning of theology was used to describe pagan belief. See, why am I telling you all of this instead of talking about the slave scriptures? Before I get to that, I need you to help you understand why it was so easy to justify slavery from a biblical context. See, before the churches got professional and started seminaries, the actual place where people were taught the word of Yahweh was in meetings with other well-studied believers. Wanting people to have paper credentials has been a long tradition of people who place no importance on those whom society has not deemed worthy of respect. Pagans always love credentials. So what does that say about those who want people to share the gospel to have theology degrees? The Catholic Church is being left behind by the Protestant movement, so at the Council of Trent from the years 1545 to 1563, the Catholic Church funded the very first seminaries. See, Martin Luther had this to say about councils. Unless I am convicted by scripture and plain reason, I do not accept the authority of popes and councils, for they have contradicted each other. My conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me. Amen. But then the Protestants would later follow the Catholics and started their first seminary in America in 1808. But see, sometime before in America, Yale was educating preachers in the year 1801, and Harvard started to educate them 65 years before in 1636. So Yale had a rich history in benefiting from slave labor and the eugenics movement. Now, I'm not sure if they've removed it or not, but they also had a Confederate memorial in Memorial Hall. Harvard has a lot of ties to slavery as well. Many of its donors earned their income through slave dealing and slavery-dependent businesses. They were also very big on eugenics. See, I guess should I get started now on the Christian slavery, the pro-Christian slavery thought? pro-slavery Christian thought, I should say. See, because Baptist ministers in the southern United States taught that there were two separate heavens, one for blacks and one for whites. And see, Reverend Thomas Dixon's Klansman was made into a film in 1915 known as The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith, which actually glorifies the Klan. Did you hear me say Reverend Thomas Dixon? In the early 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan, 1920s, 100 years ago, the Ku Klux Klan boasted over 4 million members. Every last one of them are practicing Christian. Now, to show you something, when there were fires set in front of black homes and churches, ironically, it was always a cross. See, we tend to think that the cross represents the Messiah, but we are sadly mistaken. The cross is actually a Roman symbol of death. See, the curse of Cain was used to support a ban on ordaining blacks to most Protestant clergy until the 1960s in the United States and Europe. Catholic dioceses in the southern United States adopted a policy of not ordaining blacks to oversee, administer the sacraments to, or accept confessions from white parishioners. And see, this policy was justified by the perceived threat of having slaves rule over their masters. Some years back, I read something from this guy who called himself the Christian disciple. And I took this from the article. It will probably be pleaded that those who keep no slaves have no concern in his guilt. But is this the fact? Do those who keep no slaves protect the slaveholders in their oppression? What would be the fate of those domineering lords if those who have no slaves should avowedly withdraw their protection and leave the masters and slaves to settle this one question? Whose turn is it to serve in the future? If a small number of our white people happen to be subjected to bondage in the African states or pressed on board foreign ships of war, how soon is the cry of injustice spread throughout the land? Will God not be avenged on such a nation as this? If we had no other national guilt, if persisted in, would be enough to sink us in the deepest gulf of national wretchedness. And he concluded by saying, if you think the subject is too frivolous for the Christian disciple, be entreated to consider what would be your views and feelings should you be doomed to spend your days in slavery and to have your children from generation to generation in the same deplorable state. What would you then think of the heart that cannot feel for you, or the tongue that would not plead your case? What do you think about that one, Christians? See, Dr. Kwaku Person Lynn, who's on the staff of Cal State and Africana Studies, said this: the reason people of African descent are here in the Americas today can be attributed to the massive slave trading business of European Christians. The reason Africa is in the state it is because of European Christians. The reason most African people don't know who they are and are always frown when someone accidentally calls them an African is because of European Christians. This whole process began with Pope Julius II, who signed a papal bull between two Christian nations, Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal. I'm going to talk about them one day. Prior to the 16th century, Spain signed a contract with the Portuguese called Asiento, allowing them a monopoly in the carrying and selling of Africans across the Atlantic, until the English, who were the most aggressive, along with the French, Dutch, and later the rest of Europe, joined in. Dr. Lynn did not just attack Christianity. Islam was addressed as well. See, that's into that. Columbus, looking for a new world, was a historical lie they taught all of us and still teach it. The story of the slaves in America begins with Christopher Columbus. And his voyage to America, I thought it was financed by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. myself, but, you know, came across other information said they didn't finance his journey at all. But it was a guy named Louis V. Santangelo, yeah, who advanced Columbus the sum of 17,000 ducats, which is about 5,000 pounds, which was equal to 50,000 pounds. I don't remember, you know, what year that was when they translated to finance the voyage. And the voyage began on August 3rd, 1492. Now, the Jews, not the tribe of Judah, the Jews were expelled from Spain on August 2nd, 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. Many of these Jews immigrated to Holland, where they set up the Dutch West Indies to exploit the New World. See, Columbus wasn't looking to discover the New World. He was looking for people to enslave. Some of the true Native Americans were captured and loaded onto his ships and taken back overseas to Spain. Then they were shipped down into Africa and then put on ships and sent back home to the American colonies as slaves. They ain't teaching you that in school. In 1896, a question was made by a socialist. He stated, the church has set up a claim to be the moral and spiritual guides of humanity, to whom all men should look to for guidance as to their conduct in life and qualifications for life hereafter. The question I propose to examine is, do they fulfill these functions? It pains me to say this, but I have to agree with a socialist for a change. I mean, I ain't no fan of socialism, but I have to agree with this dude. And when we look throughout history, we see that many black people have leaned toward a socialist ideology. See, when you have a socialist proposing a question such as this, and Christians participating in the slave trade, it makes more sense and it makes it easier to understand why blacks chose this path. You see, some may say if blacks read the Bible, they would know better. Well, that's a moot point when you understand how Bibles were removed from them before being taken overseas. And you see, now that I have different versions of Scripture than what we've been given in today's time, the Bible reads a lot more different to me now, which makes understanding much easier. And like I said, you know, when I read that King James Bible, you know, 25 years ago, you know, and people, I got my first Bible at age 10. It was a graduation gift from 5th grade. And right today, that's been 40 years ago, over 40 years ago. I still have that Bible. I still have that Bible. I still have my very first Bible. But I heard over the years people say, I don't read the King James Bible because it's too hard to understand. I like to read the NIV. Y'all realize the NIV was put together by a lesbian? Oh, my bad. Sorry to bust the bubble. But every time I read the King James Bible, I never had a problem understanding it. Because I would always ask for guidance, even back then, when I really didn't have nobody helping me understand Scripture. Because I kept hearing people say they had trouble reading and understanding it, I would always ask God, you know, God, can you give me the awareness to understand what I'm about to open up and read, whatever it may be? And it didn't matter where. Sometimes I would just open the Bible and I would start reading that for the day. It didn't matter where it was. And I never had a problem understanding the King James Version. And now that I have these other Bibles, I have trouble understanding all these other ones. Because I'm sitting there thinking, man, how did they mess the Bible up this bad? Because they done messed it up. But all of your modern Bibles were created in the 1800s. Even the 1611 authorized King James was created then as well. See, the problem with the socialist mindset, in my opinion, if they're promoting of equality, is that they never tell the people that everyone will be equally poor under socialist utopia. That's why I say slavery was not a function of capitalism like a lot of black people keep teaching. And I mean, there are a lot of black men that I respect that keep teaching that capitalism was the dominant economic system during slavery because black people were the capital. But I disagree, and I will continue to disagree, that slavery was not a function of capitalism alone. It was a hybrid system composed of capitalism, socialism, communism, and feudalism. You see, the author of that article further stated, I declare that the average churchgoer who is influenced by what he obtains from his function becomes a narrow, saving, squeezing creature, taking little or no part in the vigorous life of the community, but very commonly becoming, by his isolated action, a source of weakness in any real democratic movement. Remember in the video when I kept stating that you believe your only job was to save souls? Well, socialists a lot of times are atheists. And if an atheist can see that you're doing nothing to truly help others, that's pretty bad. See, the Messiah gave us 2 commands and 2 only. Because he said, you know, y'all too dumb to remember 10, so I'm going to just give you 2. And love Yah and love your neighbor. See, 1 Corinthians 13:1 says, although you speak with the tongues of men and angels, but you have no love, you ain't doing nothing but making a lot of noise. See, that's what you Christians are doing when you say your objective is to only save souls. You're saying a lot and doing a lot of nothing. See, the socialist, whoever he was, wrote a scathing report on the churches and chapels. And he also said, what are you ministers and plutocratic members of the rich churches and chapels doing to make earth more like heaven? Are the religious plutocrats and preachers trying to change the basis of society so that better conditions shall prevail? Assuredly not. On the contrary, they are determined opponents of those who try to make such change. I'm going to read that again. They are determined opponents of those who try to make such changes. How can I say that? Just look at the black community. Look where a big church is. Look where any church is. Name one thing that's improved. Name one thing that's improved. See, what do we say when we recite the Lord's Prayer? In Matthew 6:10, it says, on earth as it is in heaven. See, this guy was running the preachers of the day through the ringer. But was he lying? His message still prevails today. He then asks, where is the morality or religion in taking 10% usury? I don't call it usury because usury has a lot to do with interest. I call it just straight up theft. In 2 Peter 2:3 it says, and through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingers not, and their damnation slumbers not. This guy said the deity was insulted by these devourers of widows' houses, and the truth is not in them. And Christians truly needed to be born again. And if we look at a great majority of messages coming from the pulpits today, a great deal of them are geared toward women who receive more of the money from the more emotional being. See, I mean, this guy could almost be a preacher. I guess based on what we've been hearing from the pulpit for long, he might possibly accomplish more than the preachers combined. You know, he said, don't go to God begging him to do what you ought to do, and that we are the ones responsible for righting the evils and the wrongs in this world. See, this guy had to be speaking to Christians who said their job is to save souls, not to right and fight wrong. What does love your neighbor as yourself mean? It means don't do something to someone else that you wouldn't want done to you. Turning a blind eye to slavery and injustice by hiding behind the Bible and Christianity is a coward's position. This guy said we're spending too much time on our knees asking for forgiveness when we should be striving to live righteous lives and working to right the things that are wrong. This guy was hitting preachers and Christians right where they needed to be hit, in the gut. And this is the same thing we need today. But what do we have? Let's build bigger churches so we can bring more people in to help pay for this, pay for it. And that's the goal of many of these charlatans. Why aren't pastors telling the congregants to spend more time going out? Because that's what the Bible said, go out. Your pastor said, bring them in. Your The Messiah said, you go out and make disciples. Your pastor said, bring them in and let me make them disciples. So who are you listening to? You're listening to your pastor. You're not listening to the Messiah's words. Go out to the four corners and make disciples of all nations. Go out to the four corners. Go out, go out, go out. Your pastor say, bring them in, bring them in, bring them in. They want to build bigger churches. I personally think you need to shut all of them down. And if I'm speaking out of order, Father, I repent. But I don't think I'm speaking out of order, because why do we always hear, if, you know, and I'm going to use most Christian terms, if Jesus were to return today for his bride, he wouldn't even recognize her. Because people think the bride is the church. Because that's what pastors have been teaching. But let me get back on topic. You know, this guy said missions and mission means are exactly what these exploiting plutocrats rejoice in. He said, I'm not condemning religion, but the lack of it. And he desires to see every holy enthusiast put an end to wrongdoing. This guy said that 49/5 of present-day poverty and crime would disappear if the thieves of society, the preachers, would disappear. This guy said the thieves of society, the preachers, needed to disappear. I mean, how can you argue with what this guy is saying looking at society right now? Now, if you're interested in this full article, the title of it is A Socialist View of Religion. And the rest of it can be found at www.marxist.org, marxists.org, because it's much longer than a few snippets I just shared. See, when we look at the issue of Hebrews having other Hebrews as servants or slaves, if everyone want to paint every person in a bondage situation, it looks a little different than what we like to believe. See, in those cases, Hebrews placed themselves into bondage for a term of 6 years. In the 7th year, they had to be released from all debts and servitude unless they desired to remain with the owner. And in those cases, he was called Adonai. He wasn't called master. He was called Adonai. And it said the way you said you wanted to stay with your Adonai, you had to allow your ear to be pierced. But they were supposed to be released. And during that period of release, the Bible declares that they were to be treated well. See, that's from Exodus 21. In Leviticus 29, verses 39 and 40, it tells Israel, if one of their brothers ends up poor and they come to you for work, you are to treat them as hired workers or temporary residents, but never as slaves. Deuteronomy 15, 13 and 14 says, you don't send your servants away empty-handed after they have fulfilled their obligation to you. You were supposed to give to them based on how Yah had blessed them. Also in Exodus 21, verses 5 6, it says the indentured servant could actually choose to become his Adonai's servant for life, but it was totally up to the servant. But they tell you in the Bible today say you could choose to be your master's slave for life. But the servant got to determine if he wanted to remain with his boss. The boss didn't get to determine that. The servant did. Exodus 21 gives an account on how treatment of servants was to take place. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the practice of slavery at all. You know, never make that mistake. You know, this is a very difficult subject, especially when you're talking about from a Christian standpoint. But it's hard to defend it from any viewpoint. See, the law also provided for the servant's redemption at any time, as is stated in Leviticus 25, verses 48 to 52. And the treatment of the Hebrew servant was supposed to be considerate. You know, servants were to be treated as workers hired from year to year. See, you must see to it that those whom they own servants do not rule over them ruthlessly. And that's in verse 53. And if no redemption came, the servants were still released with their families on the year of Jubilee. And that's verse 54. See, in the New Testament, the Bible did not demand that every slave owner immediately enslave the slave. But see, like I told you, it's a moot point because slave, the word ain't slave. See, Adonai were advised on the proper treatment of the slaves. And Ephesians 6 and 9, it reads this way, not the way the modern Bible says. And ye add them, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that Yah also is in heaven. Neither is there respect of persons. Elsewhere the command is, Adonai, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that you also have an Adonai in heaven. That's Colossians 4:1. The seeds of the emancipation of servants are in the Bible, which teaches that all men are created by God and made in his image. That's Genesis 1:27. And it condemns those who kidnap and sell a person. That's Exodus 21:16, 1 Timothy 1:8-10. And this right here, now, not now a servant, but above a servant, a brother, beloved, especially to me, but how much more unto you, both in the flesh and in Yahuwah. That's Philemon 1:16. See, I'm going to be honest. We have been conditioned and taught that the apostles and the Messiah never condemned slavery. Well, if we continue to read the modern Bibles, it looks that way. But if we go back to the Hebrew scriptures instead of the Roman scriptures, we will see that it was always addressed as servants and not slaves. See, Christians love to talk about how great the founding fathers were, but they casually overlooked that those founders owned slaves. Not all of them. I think about 10 of them. Christians are quick today to criticize what they call a Hebrew roots movement, but they are also quick to defend the Roman roots movement, which is basically everything they are practicing. Why does the Hebrew calendar contain 13 months and start in March, and the Roman calendar contain 12 months and start in January? Which system are we following? Why does the Hebrew Sabbath fall on Saturday, and the Christian and Roman Sabbath fall on Sunday? Why does the Hebrew Bible say assembly, and the Roman and Christian Bible say church? Why does the Hebrew Bible say at every assembly you're supposed to have more than one teacher, and the Roman and Christian Bibles only allow one? Why did the Hebrews practice a full feast for the supper, but the Roman and Christian church gave a sip of grape juice and a cracker? But I'm off the topic a little bit, just a little. Because everything the Hebrew Bible taught is in total opposition to what today's churches are teaching, promoting, and doing. See, the Roman and Christian churches gave us slaves instead of servants. The Hebrew Bible gave us servants instead of slaves. Sure, that was slaves in Egypt, according to the Bible, and we see the whole reasoning behind it. We see in Luke 21:24 that slavery would come again for the Hebrew children. The Hebrew Bible shows that Hebrews had servants, not slaves. Hebrews never owned slaves. All slavery has been done by Gentile nations. Let me say that again. All slavery has been done by Gentile nations. Amazingly, Christians have been taught from their pulpits all over that they should be standing with the people who literally started the slave trade. The reason most don't know this is because those people own and control the print press and have done everything in their power to hide and suppress the information. They are so crafty that they have done these utilizing passports under different nationalities to hide their true identity. Who do you think the real British were that ran the slave trade? Who do you think the real Dutch were that ran the Dutch East and Dutch West Indies corporations? Who do you think owned a great majority of slave ships? But your pastors are telling you to stand with them. Christians don't even realize how they're being controlled to love certain people and hate others by the men in the pulpit. In 2 Maccabees, chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, it says, so Nicanor undertook to make as much money off the captive Yahudiym as should defray the tribute of 2,000 talents, which the king was to pay to Roman. Wherefore immediately he sent to the cities upon the sea coast, proclaiming a sale of the captive Yahudiym, Yahudiym means Judah, and promising that they should have 80 and 10 bodies for 1 talent, not expecting the vengeance that was to follow upon him from El Shaddai. Now, you can find the books of Maccabees online. However, just like all of your other Bibles today, they will say Jew instead of Yahudiym because the owners of the print press want you to sympathize with them. So there's an old 70s or 80s R&B song called The Hustle. See, reading through the Bible, and the apocrypha in most cases, the only justification for slavery was to pay a financial debt or provide recompense if you were caught stealing from somebody else. In Deuteronomy 24:7 it says, if a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Yasharel, that's Israel, and make merchandise of him, or sells him, then that thief shall die, and you shall put evil away from among you. See, that's why these Christian scholars remove the apocrypha. It gets real hard teaching from a book when the book actually condemns your thought process and behavior. Being a slave owner and sympathizing with those who own slaves makes it hard to read and teach what the book says when the book is in direct opposition to your narrative. Exodus 21:16 says, and he that steals a man and sell him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. 1 Timothy 1:9-10 says, we also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly and sinful, the unholy and irreligious, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers, for the sexually immoral, for those practicing homosexuality, for men stealers and liars and perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to the sound doctrine. The law, see, great majority of your pastors today tell you the law was done away with. The law was done away with. The Messiah said he came to fulfill the law, not abolish it. So it never got abolished. And, I told you in the book, but hey, what do I know? Certain laws were abolished because, you don't really see polygamy for the most part anymore. That was abolished. You don't have to take the animal sacrifices anymore. That was abolished. Those type of laws were abolished. But the moral laws were never abolished. Paul had this to say in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 21-23. Are you called being a servant? Care not for it. But if you be made free, use it rather. For he that is called in Yahuwah, being a servant, is Yahuwah's free man. Likewise also he that is called being free is Mashiach's servant. Ephesians 4:28 says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. See, all of those people who are against slavery actually fought against slavery. They didn't sit around saying they were trying to save souls and telling the slaves they were praying for them. They took the slave system head on and fought against it. Even hired slaves with the Underground Railroad. Some of them were so serious about that human atrocity that when slave catchers came to their homes looking for slaves, they would tell them there were no slaves in their home because they did not believe in slavery. And the people whose homes they visited were considered so moral and upright that the slave catchers believed them because they were known not to lie. And the slave catchers knew the people were truth tellers, and that's why their homes were visited, because they felt that they had any indication of slaves, those folks would surely tell them. In Jasher 44:17 it says that, and Zelicah said unto him, how goodly are thy appearance and form. Truly I have looked at all the slaves, and have not seen so beautiful a slave as thou art. We're talking about Joseph, because Joseph was a slave. He wasn't a servant. And Joseph said unto her, surely he who created me in my mother's womb created all mankind. He who created me in my mother's womb created all mankind. In verse 23 and 24 it says, and Zelicah desired Joseph in her heart that he should lie with her. And at the time Joseph was sitting in the house doing his work. Zelicah came and sat before him, and she enticed him daily with her discourse to lie with her, or ever to look at her. But Joseph would not hearken to her. And she said unto him, if thou wilt not do according to my words, I will chastise thee with the punishment of death, and put an iron yoke upon thee. You see, right or wrong, those who held slaves were instructed against doing certain things that would abuse or harm them. Zelicah then called all of her female servants in and handed them knives. And when Joseph came in, all of the servants stared in awe at how handsome Joseph was. I mean, I guess he looked like me. But I'm just kidding. But you see, Zelicah was setting a plan in place. All of the female servants actually cut their hands with the knives that she had given them, and the knives were so they could peel citrus fruits. But those female servants were so in awe of how handsome Joseph was that they didn't even realize they had cut themselves. Joseph had to be one handsome dude. And see, I guess that's another reason his brothers hated him, because he talked too much to them. When he told them, I had a dream and my haystack was bigger than all y'all. Oh, we're going to get rid of this little one here. He talked too much. But Zelicah then told her servants, y'all can't stop looking at him for this short time frame. So how am I supposed to resist him when he is around me all day? See, this practice was widespread during the transatlantic slave trade. The women of the masters regularly abused the slave men when the husbands weren't around. In Exodus 21:16, it says, whoever steals someone to sell them as a slave or keep them for their own slave must be killed. See, them Christian slaveholders weren't teaching this verse. Taking a human is considered one of the worst crimes against humanity. And the Bible is very clear on how the man, woman, a child stealer was supposed to be dealt with harshly. I look at these true crime stories from years ago and, what still goes on, and you look at the human trafficking that's still going on, you look at the child trafficking that's still going on right now. And I thank Yah all the time that he kept me and protected me when I was walking to school by myself in a kindergarten, in the first grade, and then second grade. I thank him, because a lot of children came up missing during that time, just like they do today. And he kept me and protected me. And then when my sister got old enough in third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, he kept us and protected us as we walked home each day. Because, in time, there's 3 years difference between me and my sister. Neither one of us were in a position to fight off any adult. So he kept us and protected us. But anybody who participated in that behavior was supposed to be dealt with harshly. Look at everything that happened to those people in Egypt for participation in slavery. You think North America, South America, and Europe are not going to be judged? The mere fact that you enslaved through kidnapping was serious enough that the person was to be put to death. What if the slaves had that Bible and got a hold of this verse? I tell you what, history will be totally different than what we have right now. And you know what? Had the slave killed those slaveholders, what the school system will be teaching us is how barbaric and brutal blacks were in the treatment of their white ancestors. I guarantee you. Isn't it amazing that all of history is basically told and taught from a European perspective, regardless of what country or continent we're talking about? Have you ever read the book Who Brought the Slaves to America? Europeans always have a tendency to make themselves look like they are the best educated, most compassionate, most benevolent, and the most spiritual. There were many opinions from Christians on what would happen if they freed their slaves. Some said the slaves would not be able to take care of themselves, so they needed to keep them and care for them. Some Christians felt that the solution to free the slaves was actually worse than keeping them as slaves. See, there are many reasons behind this, such as competition from those slaves, because the slaves were actually the ones with all of the skills. The slave owners had no skills other than thievery and greed, even from the pulpit and pews. See, the Bible says Esau was a skilled hunter. Sadly, his descendants used that skill to hunt people. The other reason they didn't want to release the people from slavery stems from Deuteronomy 15 and 13, where it says, "And when you send a male servant out from you, a free person, you shall not send him out empty-handed." See, they weren't practicing no biblical slavery because there's no such thing as biblical slavery. Anytime we see someone in the Bible in a position of serving others, they were always a servant, bondservant, bondmaid, manservant, or something like that. Anytime we see slavery, it was always bad. See, masters or bosses of servants always provided for their servants when they left. Slave masters didn't. They were greedy. But their greed was so great that they were not going to share their ill-gotten gains with the people who they had profited off of freely. These Christian slaveholders knew enough of the Bible to understand what happened the last time Israel was in bondage and was set free. In Exodus 12:36, it says, "The Lord made the Egyptians generous to the people, and they gave them what they asked for." So the Israelites stripped Egypt of its wealth. And since America was founded as a Christian nation, that we're told, Christians weren't about to give up that money. Egypt was a teaching point for them. And since America is spiritual Egypt, they felt the same thing would happen. Some Christians, as I mentioned earlier, felt that many blacks were pagans. So they felt that they would capture and sell them and make them do right according to their standards. The standards of the Dark Ages, because that's what Europe was for 1,000 years, in the Dark Ages. See, but the problem with that thought process is that you cannot do evil to counter evil and tell yourself you're doing good. See, the real pagans are Christians, and they don't even realize it. Y'all remember I did a video some months back titled, "Is Christianity Pagan?" Go back and listen to that video. G.K. Chesterton said, "The Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, probably because generally they're the same people." In 1704, a statement was made in an Athenian oracle out of London. And it said, "Whether trading for Negroes, carrying them out of their own country into perpetual slavery, be itself unlawful, and especially contrary to the great law of Christianity." The reply to it was, "Sir, after mature and serious consideration of the question proposed, I am for the affirmative and cannot see how such a trade by Christians can be any way justified and reconciled to the Christian law. And here, let me first propose my reasons, and then answer such weak pleas as used to be made for it. I take it to be contrary to the great law of nature, of doing unto all men as we would they should do unto us, in which, as our Savior tells us in Matthew 7 and 12, is the sum of the law and the prophets. For let us put care to ourselves and consider what it will be for a man to be stolen away from his native country and hurt into perpetual bondage, or to have a child snatched from his embraces and so used, and then see if this trade and practice can be any way reconciled to this rule, the golden rule. And surely they that have the gospel and yet sin against the very laws of nature shall have a severer punishment at the day of judgment than those poor, silly wretches that have only that dim light to guide them. And perhaps those poor wretches in chains, when death shall make them free, may rise up in judgment and condemn those more cruel and unnatural men that so unjustly deprive them of that liberty which God and nature had given them." That's pretty powerful. He said they were cruel and unnatural men that did that. So Christian slave owners put several arguments to the front. Now, I'm going to read some of the pro-arguments and to justify the behavior. I'm going to read maybe some of those replies. Plea 1. We slaveholders deny the charge. We do not steal them, but make a law for purchase of them. Answer. Purchase them for toys and baubles? Perhaps you may, but lawfully I'm sure you cannot. For they would sell them to steal them, or take them away by violence. And you know the proverb, the healer is as bad as the stealer. We are they that call ourselves Christians, that encourage them in such evil practices. Plea 2. But most of them are taken prisoners of war by one petty prince from another, and sold by the conqueror. Answer. But who are commonly the cause of this war? Or what do they commonly fight about, but to gain the booty of the field, slaves to be sold? And I am credibly informed, 'tis usual for the traders in this unlawful commodity to send presents to some petty prince among them, to make war with his neighboring prince, to take such prisoners and furnish their cargo. And who then must answer for all of this blood and injustice? Plea 3. These men are more heathens than pagans. Answer. Pray, what men? What have we to do with them? Have they not a common right to those temporal blessings which an indulgent Creator has given them, as well as we? Is dominion founded in grace? May a man that is pleased to call himself a Christian under that notion wrong or molest such as people who had not the happiness to be born in a Christian country? Though we ought to be kinder to our brother Christian, yet surely we ought to do good, or at least to do no wrong to mere pagans and infidels. Plea 5. The law of our land allows it. The answer. The law of our land is so far from allowing it that if an infidel be brought into this kingdom of Great Britain, as soon as he can give an account of the Christian faith and desires to be baptized, any charitable, lawful minister may do it, and then he is under the same law with other Christians. That's amazing, ain't it? But you don't hear many of your pastors talking like that, do you? In 1742, Governor Gooch of Virginia wrote this to the Bishop of London. Many slaveholders felt that no matter how much conversion might benefit the Negro souls, it could only make them worse slaves. Occasionally, they went so far as to change the efforts at conversion foster rebellion rather than piety. An Anglican minister in Virginia explained, as for baptizing Indians and Negroes, several of the people disapprove of it because they say it often makes them proud and not so good servants. So how can we go from the Bible saying slaves and this Anglican minister saying servants? Because, see, the Anglican minister knew what that Bible really said. See, who's they that the minister was talking about? Who does the minister represent? In historical collections relating to the American colonial church, it was stated that planters voiced objections to Christianizing slaves because it made them more perverse and untractable, less amenable to discipline, more discontented with their lot, which may well have been true. A guy named Hugh Jones stated that baptism hurt slaves by giving them better notices of themselves than is consistent with their state of slavery and their duty to their masters. In the duty of Christians to propagate their religion among heathens, this is what it reads. The Reverend Francis Lajoie reported from South Carolina that a lady had inquired of him. Try not to laugh when I read this, even though I'm laughing before I read it. The lady inquired of him, is it possible that any of my slaves could go to heaven and I must see them there? And that a young gentleman had said sometime before that he is resolved never to come to the holy table while slaves are received there. Well, you weren't going to be at the holy table no way. That one ain't going to be in heaven no way. Peter Kahn wrote that opposition arose partly by the conceit of its being shameful to have a spiritual brother or sister among so despicable people, partly by thinking that they would not be able to keep their Negroes so subjected afterwards, and partly through fear of Negroes growing too proud on seeing themselves upon a level with their masters in religious matters. Reverend William Smith, in Historical Collections of the Colonial Church, said, when a slave is once Christian, he conceits that he ought to be upon a level with his master in all other respects. See what the Christians thought? Some of them still think that way. That's why in your multicultural churches you hardly have any blacks in leadership positions. I talked about that in some other videos already. Here's some accounts of what Christians had to say about Negroes. Mr. Fletcher said that his parishioners were generally so brutish that they would not suffer their Negroes to be instructed, catechized, or baptized. Mr. Wee said his people are better disposed. They are generally willing to have their Negroes instructed and baptized, that they are in his parish a dozen Negroes, communicants that he is but of short standing in the parish, but resolved to pursue that good work. Mr. Manadir has often pressed on his people their obligation to instruct their Negroes, but yet they are very remiss and neglectful. Mr. Nichols says his custom has always been to catechize the youth of his parish on all holidays. He has from the pulpit and in conversion been instant with his parishioners to instruct their Negroes in order to their being made Christians, but that the best answer he can get, even from the best people, is that they are sorry and lament that they cannot comply with it. Mr. Cox has urged the necessity of instructing the Negroes, but though his parishioners allow it to be a good thing, yet they generally excuse themselves as thinking it to be impractical. Mr. Williamson says that by the pains he has taken in instructing the Negroes of his parish, he finds them to be of three sorts. The first wave are so grossly ignorant that there is no possibility of instructing them in the principles of Christianity. The second are capable of instruction and learn the answers to the questions of the church catechism, but are so egregiously wicked as to render baptism ineffectual. The third is duly qualified and of exemplary lives, some of whom are baptized so that he has good hopes to succeed with the latter sort, especially of their masters and mistresses being assisted. Many proponents of conversion were entirely willing to concede that Negroes were ignorant, stupid, unteachable, barbarous, stubborn, and deficient in understanding. Many advocates of conversion felt called upon to assert with considerable vehemence that Negroes possessed the same capacities as Europeans and wanted only the opportunity of improvement in order to develop them. And I mean, it's amazing that they say Negroes possess the same capacities as Europeans. And I mentioned earlier how Europe was in the dark ages for 1,000 years. Richard Poe's book, Black Spark, White Fire, said black people taught Europeans. But they want to keep saying blacks are the barbaric ones. See what Richard Poe had to say about that. White guy Richard Poe. Ain't no black guy. Even before the beginning of the 18th century, one writer insisted repeatedly that Negroes were endued with equal faculties, both sensitive and intellectual. And in 1711, the Bishop of London reminded masters in the plantation that their slaves were equally the workmanship of God with themselves, endued with the same faculties and intellectual powers. Bishop William Fleetwood said the chief obstacle in the path of their program was the slaveholder's fear that conversion might weaken his dominion over his slaves. See, accordingly, they went out of their way to stress that Christianizing Negroes will make them much better slaves, not worse. Dean George Berkeley said in 1725 that the problem was to convince American planters that it would be of advantage to their affairs to have slaves who should obey in all things their masters according to the flesh, not what eye serves as men pleases, but in singleness of heart as fearing God. That gospel liberty consists with temporal servitude, and that their slaves would only become better slaves by being Christians. They will become better slaves by being Christians. Or like they slow down, they would become better slaves by being Christian. Reverend Thomas Bacon felt no hesitation in telling a slave that they must obey their masters in all things, even when cruelly abused. Your masters and mistresses, he explained glowingly, are God's overseer. That's kind of like these people telling, you got these pastors telling these women, these wives, they should stay in these relationships with their husbands who beating the hell out of them. You know, because that's the biblical thing to do. Ain't nothing biblical in the Bible about taking no beating to remain in no relationship. The man, yes, the woman is supposed to submit to the man according to the Bible, but the man has to create that proper environment for her to submit. Never forget that. Beat the hell out your wife ain't nowhere in the Bible. But the masters and mistresses, he explained, are God's overseer. See, as far as the Puritans were concerned, slavery was simply not a problem. Do I need to say that again? As far as the Puritans were concerned, slavery was simply not a problem. The Puritans who settled in colonies where slavery became a firmly established institution accepted the subordination of the Negro without protest, yet without and special eagerness, and the same was true in the Puritan-dominated New England. Now, one question you need to ask yourself: how did the Pilgrims become Native Americans? Or better yet, how did the Pilgrims become American Indians? See, now you got to go study the $5 Indian story and all of that other stuff. Because it's amazing how quickly the Pilgrims disappeared from the annals of history after we found out when they first got here. You know, what's that book, Pilgrim's Pride? You know, we hear about that, but all of a sudden, not long after that, the Pilgrim disappeared from history. And all of a sudden, we got American Indians. Because the Pilgrims didn't disappear. They changed their identity to American Indian. But see, you already had blacks here that were Native Americans. Now, there were some Christian folks who had different thoughts on the issue from a different perspective, you know. Reverend Samuel Willard said that they have souls equally capable of being saved or lost. And the soul of a slave is, in its nature, of as much worth as the soul of his master, having the same noble faculties and power, and being immortal, and being alike precious to Christ, who paid as great a price for redemption of the soul of this person as of the other. Think you that your children are any way better by nature than the poor Negroes? No, in no wise. Blacks are just as much and no more conceived and born in sin as white men are. Both, if born and bred up here, I am persuaded, are naturally capable of the same religious improvement. Cotton Mather said, their complexion sometimes is made an argument why nothing should be done for them, as if the great God went by the complexion of men in his favors to them, as if none but whites might hope to be favored and accepted with God. Away with such trifles. The God who looks on the heart is not moved by the color of the skin, is not more propitious to one color than another. Now, I've heard some men say that they believe they did wrong in getting Negroes, but they did not know what to do with them now that they had got them. For if they let them go free after some time, if any mishap befell them, their estates were obliged to maintain them. What did I tell you earlier about what the Bible said? These people knew. These people knew what the Bible said and what they were supposed to do and how long they were supposed to have someone in their servitude. These people knew. Now let me continue. Now I can truly say that this practice of making slaves of men appears to be so great and evil to me that for all the riches and glory of this world, I would not be guilty of so great a sin as this seems to be. And I believe many would see it so were they not so blinded by self-interest. And all this is done by violence, which is forbidden in the scriptures. For there we are commanded to do no violence to no man. Quaker, Reverend Elihu Coleman, I'm reading from a testimony of that anti-Christian practice of making slaves of men. Now, by this practice of slavery, they hate the name of Christian, and even nature itself tells them it is Wrong. I must inform you in the meekness and gentleness of Christ that I think God has a quarrel with you for your abuse of and cruelty to the poor Negroes. From Anglican Reverend George Whitfield to the inhabitants of Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, concerning their Negroes, Whitfield said, God does not reject the prayer of the poor and destitute, nor disregard the cry of the meanest Negro. The blood of them spilled for these many years in your respective provinces will ascend up to heaven against you. But I have great reason to believe that most of you, on purpose, keep your Negroes ignorant of Christianity or otherwise. I know the general pretense is that teaching them Christianity would make them proud and consequently unwilling to support slavery. But farther, if teaching slaves Christianity has such a bad influence on their lives, if teaching slaves Christianity has such a bad influence on their lives, why are you generally desirous of having your children taught? Read that again. If teaching slaves Christianity has such a bad influence on their lives, why are you generally desirous of having your children taught? Early this morning, it was given me to see that all slave keepers and traders with them for gain were apostates which pretended to be Christians, especially in ministers. It is a double crime because of their bad example to their flock. For all such have the mark of the beast, whore and false prophet on them. Mystery Babylon, mother of harlots. Let them preach as long as they will or may. Reverend Samuel Hopkins said in a dialogue concerning the slavery of the Africans, if the slavery in which we hold blacks is wrong, it is a very great and public sin, and therefore a sin which God is testifying against in the calamities he has brought upon us, and consequently must be reformed before we can reasonably expect deliverance or even sincerely ask for it. Thomas Day, who lived during the time with the founding fathers, had this to say: if there be an object truly ridiculous in nature, it is an American patriot signing resolutions of independence with one hand and with the other brandishing a whip over his affrighted slaves. If men would be consistent, they must admit all the consequences of their own principles, and you and your countrymen are reduced to the dilemma of either acknowledging the rights of your Negroes or of surrendering your own. Yes, gentlemen, as you are no longer Englishmen, I hope you will please to be men, and as such, admit the whole human species to a participation in your unalienable rights. You need to give Thomas Day a high five. He told them founders where to go. He told them they were hypocrites. Reverend Jacob Green had this to say: can it be believed that a people contending for liberty should at the same time be promoting and supporting slavery? In our contest with Britain, much has been said and published in favor of liberty. In what horrid colors has oppression and slavery been painted by us? And is it not a great sin for us to practice it as Britain? It's not the hard yoke of slavery felt by Negroes as well as by white people. Are they not fond of liberty as well as others of the human race? Is not freedom the unalienable right of all? If liberty is one of the natural and unalienable rights of all men, as doubtless it is, if 'tis self-evident, so clear that it needs proof how unjust, how inhuman, but actually to violate this right. Britain is attempted to violate it. We in America have a long time been in violation of it. Quaker John Hepner said, this practice of slavery contradicts Christ's command, who commanded us to do all men as we should they do to us, or as we would be done by. Now, in one of the earlier videos I released, I mentioned John Wooman. And I gave one statement from him, and you know, I would be doing John Wooman a disservice if I didn't mention him in this talk as well, because Wooman had this to say, and Wooman has some different writings as well. But Wooman had this to say: I have beheld then as Gentiles under people professing Christianity. See, Wooman called the slaveholders Gentiles. But your pastors tell you to stand with them. But I have beheld then as Gentiles, under people professing Christianity, not only kept ignorant of the Holy Scriptures, but under great provocations to wrath, of whom it may be truly said, they that rule of them make them to howl, and the holy name is abundantly blasphemed. Many lives have been shortened through extreme oppression, while they labored to support luxury and worldly greatness. And though many people in outward prosperity may think little of those things, yet the gracious Creator hath regard to the cries of the innocent, however unnoticed by men. What pious man could be a witness to these things and see a trade carried on in this manner without being deeply affected with sorrow? The prophet Isaiah mentions oppression as that which the true church in time of outward quiet should not only be clear of, but should be far from it. Thou shalt be far from oppression. That's Isaiah 54:14. Now these words, far from, appear to have an extensive meaning and to convey instruction in regard to that which Solomon speaks. Though hand join in hand, yet the wicked shall not go unpunished. Proverbs 11:21. Did you catch what Wooman said at the beginning of this quote? He said, professing as Gentiles. Wooman knew who the true Gentiles were. Now, you know, we've heard of the accounts of all of the women who were raped by their slave master. Did you realize in the slaveholders' eyes, they were considered, they considered having sex with the women was considered labor? And they believed the sole purpose on earth of Negroes was to perform labor for white men. But I understand why many blacks reject and have rejected Christianity. In Galatians 3:13 it says, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, because it is written, everyone who is hung on a tree is cursed. See, this is probably one of the ways like groups like the KKK use the Bible to justify doing the Christian thing for wrongdoers, and they call them, and that they themselves have made them criminals. They pick and choose who they want to hang on a tree. Sitting there ending church early, carrying picnic lunches, taking pictures with the damaged bodies and destroyed and mutilated bodies, putting those pictures on postcards and mailing it to their friends and family. And you know, we got people in history calling black people barbarians. Man, do you realize what type of person you got to be to do those type of things? You have no life in you. You have no life in you. Calling yourself a Christian and believing like that, your ancestors calling themselves Christian and doing something like that, we know who their God was. And if you Christian right today and you believe like that, we know who your God is. In Genesis 15:13 it reads, and he said unto Abram, not Abram, his name is Abram, A-V-R-A-M, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Now, Abraham's descendants were enslaved for right over 400 years in Egypt, right? That was the first enslavement of Israel. And then in the second one, called the transatlantic slave trade, which started in 1444 and ran through 1865. In Luke 21:24, what did the Messiah say? They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles or other nations until the time of the Gentiles or other nations are fulfilled. See, the Messiah said a second enslavement of Israel was coming. Luke is in the New Testament, well after Genesis and Exodus account of slavery. Deuteronomy is after Exodus took place. which meant they are not the same periods in time. You see, a lot of Christians will say that the slave trade to the Americas wasn't prophesied in the Bible. They try to justify by saying the slaves left Egypt already. Well, why does Exodus appear before Deuteronomy in the Bible? They had already left Egypt. Deuteronomy speaks of a second 400-year period where Israel will be enslaved. That trade started in 1444 when the first people was thrown in a ship to Portugal. And it concluded in the United States in 1865 when America declared it over after a lot of men had stored up family wealth for future generations and control of the system. You know, seeing that this has transpired, how can a people claiming to be Israel if their history does not line up with the Bible? Because in John 8, they said they have never been in bondage to no man. They themselves said they have never been in bondage to no man. I believe that's John 8:40 or John 8:44, one of those. They have never been in bondage to no man, but they have been kicked out of 138 countries because of usury and destroying whatever economy they done moved to, destroying whatever country they done moved to. So how can the people claiming to be Israel if their history doesn't line up with the Bible? But your pastor sure tell you they're God's chosen. Psalm 83:4 says, they say, come, let us destroy them completely. Then no one will ever again remember the name Israel. There is only one group of people who historically hasn't had an identity because colonizers, you know, European thieves, not only stole their land, but also their identity. See, I won't go over all the scriptures on what happened when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. I already did a video sharing some of those scriptures. I mean, I have notes on every scripture out of the Bible that talks about what's going to happen. But, you know, I don't know if I need to do a video on that or not, you know, but it's there. But as abolitionism gained strength, white Southerners position themselves from an acceptance of slavery as a necessary evil to defending it as a positive good. Theological justification from their ministers allowed them to believe that not only did God sanction slavery, but slavery supporters were better Christians and more faithful interpreters of biblical texts than were their opponents. See, the slave-owning class was small, but it was supported by the overwhelming majority of churches and ministers. I guess I've been talking a little too long tonight. The voice seems like it's getting a little hoarse. See, many of today's Christians reject the Hebrew foundation of the Bible for the Roman version. Do you even understand the Roman thought process? Slavery was the bedrock of the Roman and world economy at that time. You see, some estimate that the slave population in the first century constituted approximately 1/3 of the Roman population. 33% of the Roman population were slaves. So today's Christians follow the Roman roots of the Bible, but reject the Hebrew roots version of the Bible. Other than when the Hebrews were taken as slaves by other nations, when have we ever seen slavery prevalent under Hebrew teachings and laws? But we saw it prevail under Roman law and Roman theology. Under Hebrew teachings, if a Hebrew ran away from a slaveholder, the Hebrew Roots Bible gave protection to the person who was considered a slave by society. The Roman Church often condemned slaves who fled from their masters and refused them communion. What other country condemns slaves for running away? And you want to tell me we're not under Roman law in this country? Church mission activities in the Caribbean were directly supported by the proceeds of slave ownership. Did you hear what I said? Church mission activities in the Caribbean were directly supported by the proceeds of slave ownership. I told you, evangelization ain't nothing but leads to colonization. That's all your mission trips started out as a backdoor, smooth way to get into other countries, utilizing Christianity to get people to let down their guard so those Christian missionaries could call back to their European handlers and tell them, okay, y'all can come on in and plunder the land, enslave the people, and do what y'all need to do to take all their resources and wealth. That's all your mission trip started out as. It was a sneaky way for European colonizers to get in because they were being rejected in those darker skinned countries for coming in because they had saw what they had did in other countries that were dark skinned people. So them European colonizers used missionary trips to get in through the back door into these darker skinned countries so they could get in and plunder them. In 1710, the Society for Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, there was a place called the Codrington Plantation in Barbados, and they were granted to the society to fund the establishment of Codrington College. In the first decade of ownership, several hundred slaves at the plantation estates were branded on their chests using a traditional red hot iron with the word society to signify their ownership by the Christian organization. Slave ownership at the Codrington Plantation only came to an end in 1833. Did you hear me say it started in 1710? So for 123 years, they were burning the word society on our ancestors' chests to let everybody know these people belong to us. These people belong to the Christians. A lot of you run around here identifying yourself as a Christian. I used to do that as well. Then I woke up. You know, education, study, and research will do that for you. And that's why many stay away from educating themselves, away from what the system has taught them. You know, I was thinking about something just yesterday. And I was thinking about when I was in high school and college. I mean, I love music. I've always loved music. And when I was in high school and college, when it came time to study away from school, you know, I always had my headphones on, listening to music. And walking to and from the bus stop to go to and from school, I had my music on. I would have my books open at the bus stop. I would have my books open on the bus, going back and forth. And I'd be listening to my music and I would study. And then once I left college and I really started to study on my own, I realized I didn't need music anymore to study. And then I thought about it. I said, you know, when I was being force-fed something I really didn't want to learn that I had no interest in, I had to use music to soothe me so that I can accept what I was reading in those books. Because I would look at some of that stuff in that book and think, man, I just can't believe this. And now that I study on my own, noise interferes with me when I'm studying. I love total silence and solitude. That's why a lot of my videos are done. Well, I try to do them late at night because I know I'm not going to be bothered. Late at night, early morning. The phone's not going to ring. There's not a whole lot of cars driving down the street. So you don't hear that. No kids running outside. You don't hear them screaming and all that stuff. I like studying when it's quiet. And I know I need to keep working on, you know, these late nights. And, you know, I don't do it like I used to. But I still stay up late. But see, when I was being force-fed education, it didn't appeal to me. I wasn't attracted to it. And the only class I really enjoyed in high school was woodshop. If I could have went to woodshop from 8 to 4, that's what I did all day, every day. You know, I'm not using no algebra now. I just know all I need to know how to do, like most of you, you need to know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We learned that in elementary. I'm not using calculus now. I'm not using elementary analysis and trigonometry now. I'm not using chemistry and physics now. What, other than me doing videos, that's about the only time I'm using history, and I can't even really use the history I was taught in school because it was all wrong. So, what are we really using in our lives that the school is teaching us? And I realized once I got out of school, that's why I really had no interest in it. I remember telling my algebra teacher in high school, when I leave out your class, I don't think about your class. And she got highly upset with me. And she started telling me how important algebra was. And like I said, I ain't used algebra since I left college. I had no use for it. Everything most of us are doing right now, we learned in elementary school. More than likely, by the third grade, you had learned how to do add, subtraction, multiplication, division. You had already learned how to read, most of us. You had already learned how to write, most of us. You had learned some form of deductive reasoning. You had learned some form of discovering the main idea in a paragraph or a book. You had learned subject and verb agreement. You had learned about your nouns and pronouns. So basically everything after elementary school was fluff. But the educators be mad with me. Yeah, I done spent all these years getting this education. I got my master's, I got my PhD, I got my double PhD. And you still teaching basic skills. That's what you're doing. But you know, now that I don't even listen to music that much anymore. And like I said, I love music. I used to DJ. I DJ for a while, you know, in college and after college. I think I DJ'd up until almost right before I got married because I just love music so much. But I don't listen to it that much anymore. I mean, if I do, I got to go find some old stuff because I don't know what this stuff. I still got AM FM radio. And I turn on the radio every night and I'm like, what is this garbage? And a lot of these people using them reverb machines, so it's not even a natural voice. But I'm just way off topic now. But I was just talking about learning when you force fed education, you don't have as much appreciation for it as when you go and get it for yourself. I had more fun when I was in school, when I went to the library on my own, not when it pertained to something dealing with school. When I went pertaining to something dealing with school, I wanted to get in and out as fast as possible. But when I rode the bus in high school to go find books I wanted to study, I would stay there all day. And I was talking to Daryl, my buddy Daryl, one day, and he told me something, and man, it was profound. And he told me, he said, man, I get dressed up and go to the library. How many people you hear say something like that? And but you know what? That's just the way it is. You know, all of us do something different. You know, we have different appreciation for anything, for different things. I mean, but see, that's why most of these people nowadays are stay away from educating themselves from what the system has taught them. The system has done a masterful job, especially on black folks. The system has done such a great job on black folks' mindsets that black folks think if other black folks ain't got the same educational credentials that they have, they are less than them. You got some PhDs out there earning 75, 80, 85,000 a year. But they hate a self-employed black man that earn 150,000 a year. Because in their mindset, the system has taught them the man or woman without the system degree is nothing. That's why you can't tell none of your preachers nothing, especially the black ones. Because they got their theology degrees. And now they doctor so-and-so, doctor so, Dr. Reverend Doctor, Dr. Pepper, Mr. P, you know, whatever. But the people love their lives. We should have as many historical documents and accounts of slavery from the slave's perspective, just like we do from the slave masters, just like we do from Christians, just like we do from Christian slave sympathizers and white and black slave sympathizers. Why don't we have more stories from the victims of these atrocities? It's because history is always written by those who declare themselves the victors. Notice I didn't say they were the victors. I said they declare themselves victors. I guarantee you, if the Hebrew slaves were ever put on the same footing as those who held them as slaves, history will be totally different. I bet you that. Give those slaves the same tools that the oppressors had, and let's see how they end up. Because I mentioned earlier how small the Hebrew tribes were, and they were supposed to declare the Bible and the glory of Yah to the whole world. But if you go read in the books of Jasher, if you go read in the 4 books of Maccabees, you're going to see how powerful those Hebrew brothers were with less numbers, and how victorious they were with fewer numbers. So can you imagine what history looked like if the Hebrews were put on the same footing with the slave masters? I guarantee you we wouldn't be reading what we're reading today. I guarantee you what's being taught in the classrooms today ain't what would be taught. I guarantee you that. I guarantee you wouldn't be sitting there praising the founding fathers. I guarantee you wouldn't think Christopher Columbus discovered a place where people already lived. We used to have something called President's Day. They make sure we celebrate slaveholders. They want to make sure we continue to celebrate them. They built a monument, Mount Rushmore, to the slave masters, to the slave owners. They put slave owners on your fiat currency. They put slave masters on your silver coins. They put slave masters on a whole bunch of stuff. Because they're going to make sure you bow down and be in bondage to slave masters right today. Y'all got to understand what they're doing. But see, I know. I have a lot more time to study this stuff than the average person. Because, you know, if I was at a job 8, 9, 10 hours a day like I used to be, sometimes 12, sometimes 14, sometimes 18 hours a day, yeah, I used to work like that. Last thing I'm going to do when I get home is study something. Because when I get off work on a day like that, thing I want to take a shower, I want to eat, I want to go to bed. And you don't realize when you do something like that, you're working all day, you're not exercising, you're tired, you're beat down, you eat, you shower, then you go to sleep. Then you start putting on weight, then you start getting diseases, because you are at dis-ease when you start getting overweight. Then we don't realize till years down the road what the job has done to us. The job makes us sick. That's why before the public education school system came into being in 1902, most of your people were business owners. Even the freed slaves were business owners. If you go back and look at some of the old pictures on the beach back in the 60s and 70s, you didn't see no overweight people on the beach. Now, if you go take a picture of a beach right now, you're going to see a whole lot of overweight people. Am I putting overweight people down? No. I can stand to lose some pounds. But I'm just saying, something happened. If you read Jasher in the books of Maccabees, your entire perspective is going to change based on the power of the Hebrew tribes. The Hebrew tribes, although historically have always been the smallest in numbers, have always dominated those who tried to oppress them. You know why they always dominated those who tried to oppress them? Because they always prayed to Yah when they knew they were getting ready to go into battle to deliver their enemies into their hands. But what happens as generation go past, you know, as each generation relaxes, they start adopting other cultures' identities and rules and customs and cultures. And that's what happened. The Hebrews stopped calling on Yah, and they started doing exactly what Yah told them not to do, and they started worshiping and praising just like Gentile nations. And Yah was very clear that they should not do that. And that's the reason the Hebrews were led into slavery, because they were instructed. They were the only, and right today, they are the only ones in the Bible who ever received instruction. They're the only ones. That never changed. And Father Yah said, don't do what the heathens and pagans do. But that's exactly what the Hebrew tribe did, the younger generations. And so our ancestors ended up in bondage because they got away. I mean, we don't even understand, you know, why is the name Yahuwah and Yahusha so important? What are you saying when you say Yah? Hallelujah. Yah. I got my buddy up in Canada, Marcelo. You know, he does some very good teaching on a lot of that stuff too, where he breaks down all of those words with Yah in it and the meanings of them. You know, the original Hebrew song was Kumbaya, said Kumbaya, but it was English changed into the English thing where they said it. No, it really is meant. The real pronunciation was come by here. No, it was Kumbaya. Kumbaya was the Hebrew word. Come by here was the English word or Roman word. It's when we forget our roots that we end up in bondage. See, St. Augustine describes slavery as being against God's intention and resulting from sin. What history has never taught us is that St. Augustine was black. Good luck finding this picture now. John Chrysostom describes slavery as the fruit of covetousness, of degradation, of savagery, the fruit of sin, and of human rebellion against our true Father. He literally said that Christians were not following the true Father. Christians have used a lot of verses that were improperly translated to justify the act of slavery. Some like Genesis 21, verses 9 and 10, Genesis 9, 24 through 27, Exodus chapter 20, verses 10 and verse 17. Now, in Genesis 21, it says bondwoman. In Genesis 9, it says servant. And in Exodus, it said manservant. See, Christians love verses like those that mention slavery because that solidified in their minds that mistreating people was biblically justified. I've even heard a lot of them say Jesus never spoke against it. Well, the Messiah spoke against it, but most Christians missed it. He mentioned it right in Mark 12:31 when he said to love your neighbor as yourself, and he completed the phrase by saying there is none other commandment greater than these, because right before that he said to love Yahuwah with all your heart. Now, would you tie a rope to your own neck and hang yourself? Would you place metal shackles around your neck, hands, feet? Would you place yourself on a ship and lay in your own excrement for several months? Because those voyages took about 3-6 months, something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. Would you want someone beating the hell out of you with a whip on a regular basis? Would you like to be used as a breeder to encourage more profit for somebody else? What if you were forced as a woman to start having sex at age 13 to produce more slave children? What if your husband was taken away from you and sent around the country to forcibly have sex with other women? You want to tell me, Christians, that y'all really tried to use the Bible and justify this barbaric behavior from your ancestors? What if someone had you work for free and built their family wealth off the backs of you and your children? What if those companies were still profiting off of the free labor of your ancestors right today? What if your inventions and ideas were stolen and the slaveholder patented it as his own idea and never shared any proceeds with you or your descendants? But you call yourself a person of God. I know which God you serve, and it ain't the Most High Yah. Ain't no way you love your neighbor as yourself when they created an entirely different Bible called a slave Bible to keep black people subjected and oppressed. Has there been slavery around the world? Yeah. I have a question for you though. What other enslaved people had an actual Bible created for them to keep them in bondage forever? Whenever we look at the slavery aspect, one thing we need to understand, as much as many people condemn slavery, if their personal economics depend on it, they are pro-slavery. That's why you never had people who held slaves never want to let them go. We are taught that the founding fathers held slaves while at the same time being taught how they fought to make this country free. Well, before Europeans came here, everybody was free. Europeans that came here were usually very poor, and they came here trying to find a way to exploit others for their economic gain. Now, don't take my word for it. I always tell you, don't take my word for nothing. Do your own research. Check the backgrounds of those Europeans that came here yourself. Many of them who came here were released from prisons in Europe and told they could be free as long as they never returned to Europe. Study your history. Study history and see what I'm talking about and see if I'm lying. Many of the men who were hired to work the slave ships were criminals who had no marketable skills to find employment, and they were offered jobs and an opportunity to watch over the other group of people so the ship captains and others didn't have to waste their time on a voyage doing that. So they were given opportunity to watch over another group of people for travel to the New World. That really wasn't new because it was already there. Many of these criminals felt like they were superior to the people they had been given permission to lord over. And we see the exact same thing in corporate America right today. See, Baptist pastor Richard Fuller used the Bible to defend the institution of slavery. Fuller's parents raised him Episcopalian before sending him to Harvard. He graduated in 1824, earned a law degree, got married, became a Baptist. After practicing law, he led churches in Beaufort, South Carolina, and in Baltimore, Maryland. 1847, Fuller and Brown University president Francis Wayland published something called Domestic Slavery Considered as a Scriptural Institution. And the heart of the matter boiled down to a simple question: is slavery in principle a sin? Wayland argued it is. Fuller disagreed. See, Leviticus 25 and 44 has been used to justify slavery because our modern Bible says slave. But in reality, the Bible says bondmen or bondmaids. See, Christians have used John 8:35 to justify slavery by saying even Jesus supported it. Well, the modern Bibles once again use the word slave, and the original Bible uses the word servant. Many Christians, academics, and scholars say if Jesus and Paul were against slavery, they would have immediately stopped it. Well, it's very hard to stop something when the words have been manipulated and changed. How Jesus and Paul going to stop something they didn't even realize was going on? Because of what? The Messiah, not Jesus, and Paul were speaking of servants, not slaves. So why would they work to end slavery when they were talking about servants? There were even some Christian slaveholders who said they treated them good. I treat my slaves good. I tell you what, let me hold you as a slave and treat you well and see if you'd be happy with that arrangement. Servants had families. Servants had their own homes. Slaves didn't. Unless you want to count those little shacks that the slave masters would put them in as a home, where the floor wasn't nothing but the ground or the hard concrete. No insulation in the walls. Many times, no windows on them, but openings for the windows were there. That's another reason why a lot of our ancestors died young. They got sick real easy because of the conditions they were living in, not just the brutal work. Slave families were broken up and shipped to other plantations. Servants could decide after 7 years if they wanted to remain in service to their boss. Servants got paid, slaves didn't. It's amazing that Christians will condemn polygamy, but at the same time justify slavery. They're hypocrites. Christians, let me ask you a question. Is there any one commandment in your Bible that justifies slavery? Just give me one. And I've already told you the word slave has been inserted where it should say servant. Manservant, bondman, or bondmaid. So, knowing this, give me one commandment that justifies slavery. Based on everything I've been talking about for almost a year, if you are honest with yourself, the Bibles we have today have been used as a tool for total manipulation, especially against black people. Those who now they're using the Bible to totally manipulate everybody. And now that black people, the black Hebrews, are waking up and understanding who the Bible is really talking about, now all of a sudden it's a problem from white Christians. So give me one commandment that supports slavery. Those who supported slavery didn't just have terrible theology, they were actually terrible people. Christian slaveholders felt that they were superior. Find out who started the curse of Ham, and it wasn't Christians. So you have to be careful about what you say about certain groups of people because you get labeled anti. See, Christians say the wealth that was being generated by these, well, they saw the wealth that was being generated by these other people, and they wanted a piece of that economic pie. And since I'm releasing this one on YouTube, I'll let you figure it out, but it ain't your order to figure out, though. These people fabricated the curse of Ham to show you that anyone with dark skin should be held in bondage forever, and they were never supposed to rise in any fashion. See, white Christians follow the same thought process and believe that dark skin was bound to be slaves to them as well. I think I just read recently that the Mormon Church just allowed blacks to start being placed in leadership positions. I mean, you're a black woman, hey, that's your business. And hopefully you know their history too. And, how many Black Latter-day Saints do you see? But anyway, like I said, you got to separate from all the religions anyway and get to the Bible. The Bible is more important than your religion. Some of y'all are so stuck in your religion that you're never going to get to the Bible. See, the whites you think own slaves are for the most part not the ones who dominated the trade, but they don't consider themselves white. They consider themselves colored. That's why your NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Why doesn't it say black people? Why didn't it say African people? It say colored people. Nah, you need to figure out who the colored people were. The moral nose said it was acceptance of black racial inferiority that defended American slavery by appeal to scripture. Knowles said pro-slavery Christians got it all wrong. Presbyterian theologian James Henry Thornwell believed without biblical warrant that God separated the Africans into a different class, a lower class of people. It was the inferior status that made their enslavement, in his eyes, normal. Now, you've heard me mention John Woodman. I mentioned him earlier. But Woodman was a staunch anti-slavery advocate. He said the Negroes have been a suffering people, and we as a civil society are they by whom they have suffered. Guess what Woodman believed should be done for the Negroes who had been afflicted with slavery? Woodman believed the older ones who were still living and their descendants should also be compensated at interest. Woodman believed in reparations. Quaker John Hepburn had this to say: the practice of slavery contradicts Christ's commands, who commanded us to do to all men as they should do to us, or as we will be done by. Let's see. We don't want to hear this stuff. And I'm back to Thomas Day said, Britain is attempting to violate the rights of the patriots in America. We in America have a long time been in violation of it already. John Wooden also said in another book, it may be objected that there is the cost of purchase and risk of their lives to them who possess them, and therefore it is needful that they make the best use of their time. In a practice just and reasonable, such objections have weight. But if the work be wrong from the beginning, there is little or no force in them. If I purchase a man who has never forfeited his liberty, the natural right of freedom is in him. And shall I keep him and his posterity in servitude and ignorance? How should I approve this conduct, were I in his circumstances and he in mine? In another writing movement stated, I have beheld then as Gentiles on the people professing Christianity, not only kept ignorant of the Holy Scriptures, but under great provocations to wrath, of whom it may truly be said, they that rule over them make them to howl, and the holy name is abundantly blasphemed. Many lives have been shortened through extreme oppression while they labored to support luxury and worldly greatness. And though many people in outward prosperity may think little of those things, yet the gracious Creator hath regard to the cries of the innocent, however unnoticed by men. What pious man can be a witness to these things and see a trade carried on in this manner without being deeply affected with sorrow? See, when a person doesn't know the history of a thing, abuse is inevitable. See, many things were done to blacks during slavery throughout history. See, in South Carolina, Georgia, and the West Indies, slaves were sometimes branded by their owners with a hot iron, usually with the owner's initials. I mentioned earlier about up in the Caribbean, they were branded with the word society on the chest. But they were branded with a hot iron, usually with the owner's initials. That was from the newspaper South Carolina Gazette, which ran from 1734 to 1759. Now we voluntarily do it to ourselves, especially if we're in fraternities. If you understood who your black fraternities were protecting and who most of your slave owners were and are, this whole practice of branding and tattooing yourself will stop immediately. A practice that was used to demean blacks is now openly practiced, applauded, and accepted. In the book White Over Black, Winthrop Jordan said, Negro men were most stringently barred from sexual relations with white women, sexually as well as in every other way. Negroes were utterly subordinated. White men extended their dominion over their Negroes to the bed, where the sex act itself served as a ritualistic reenactment of the daily pattern of social dominance. For by calling Negro women passionate, they were offering the best possible justification for their own passion. Not only did the Negro's woman offer a logical explanation for the white man's infidelity, but much more important, it helped shift responsibility from himself to her. If she was that lascivious, well, a man could scarcely be blamed for succumbing against overwhelming odds. For it is apparent that white men projected their own desires onto Negroes. Their own passion for Negro women was not fully acceptable to society or the self, and hence not readily admissible. Any Negro insurrection, furthermore, threatened the white man's dominance, including his valuable sexual dominance, and hence the awful prospect of being overthrown was bound to assume a sexual cast. One has only to imagine the emotions flooding through some planter who had been more or less regularly sleeping with some of his slave wenches when he suddenly learned of a conspiracy among their male counterparts. Read that again. One has only to imagine the emotions flooding through some planter who had been more or less regularly sleeping with some of his slave wenches when he suddenly learned of a conspiracy among their male counterparts. See, the white man has always used the black woman to figure out the black man's plans. That's why you don't have any black organizations that survive and thrive today. Where's the National Negro Business League? Where's the Universal Negro Improvement Association? And there are a few others I can't think of, friends of I can't think of the names right now. But you got some other ones. In many cases, yeah, they love the black skin. They love that black juice. But they getting close to them women so they can get close to the man. Because they can't directly approach the man. But it was virtually inevitable that his thoughts turned in a torrent of guilt to the safety of his wife. The white man's fears of Negro sexual aggression were equally apparent in the use of castration as a punishment in the colonies. The American colonies were generally made little conscious effort to assess the nature of the people they enslaved and took to bed. They felt no pressing need for assessment because both Negro and slavery were, by and large, self-explanatory. Negroes were people from Africa bought for the purpose of performing labor. Now, as I mentioned, that's from his book, Winthrop Jordan's book, White Over Black. And see, in their eyes, sex qualified as labor. Nothing was a white man's fault. He placed blame for everything evil he participated in on somebody else. Sometimes they went as far as castration. Did you know that George Washington Carver, the master scientist, was physically castrated at a very young age by his white plantation owners? Now, although white slave bosses were raping black slaves, male, female, and children, they, with an absurd degree of hypocrisy, believed that black males were sexual deviants that could not control their sexual urges. And so the slave owners believed that castration of innocent black boys was necessary to protect their daughters and wives from their slaves. The slavery and servitude are not the same things. Most of society participates in some form of voluntary servitude daily. It's called a job. Are we still suffering from the residual effects of slavery? Some say yes, some say no. Politics and religion were used heavily to approve of slavery. And I've been telling you for the longest time that the government has become the god of the church. At any time in history, had the preachers stepped up and said no to slavery, slavery would have been done away with a long time before it was. But how can you advocate to stop something when you're using the Bible to justify the wicked and deplorable behavior? I mean, evil people don't care about the repercussions of their actions, for as long as they aren't the ones who get affected by it. Evil people will always believe that they're right, no matter whom they're talking to, what they're talking about. Evil people have no problem faking it, fabricating stories, telling lies just to get people to think they have accomplished something great in their lives. Evil people love to belittle others, no matter how horrible it makes the other person feel. Evil people are deceitful. They don't care about how their actions affect others. In 1792, the Democratic Party was formed. And they're the party that promotes and seeks the continuance of slavery. Now, you have heard me mention a group of people that will call you anti if you mention their horrible deeds, but you realize how much control they had over the Democratic Party up until the 1960s? Now, don't get it twisted. They're still active in the party, but they're also in control of the Republican Party now. These people also started your so-called black organization like the NAACP and Urban League. See, they control the unions, they finance, control the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter movement. They have the thumbs on the heads of black folks at the end of the Revolutionary War. And if you think this thought process has disappeared, you better think again. I've come across many articles in just the last few years where Christians try and show the scripture where God endorses slavery. Just the last few years. Of course, they're using the scriptures I gave you earlier, where servant was changed to slave. But if you don't know something, how do you know you don't know? Now, seeing that there is some explanation on who could be placed in a position of slavery should open some understanding. I hope I've helped you get a better view on slavery. And, reading through these verses, we see that a person can sell themselves into slavery or servitude, which seem to be the most common. A person could be enslaved if they were a thief, although many of them were actually killed under Old Testament law. And the other form of slavery was supposed to come with Hebrews only if y'all told them to go and conquer the land. See, the captors could choose what they wanted to do with the capture, with slavery being an option. Hebrews were the only group of people who were really allowed to enslave foreigners, and it came with certain parameters that were not supposed to be cruel and harsh. Other cultures took slavery and made it much worse than it should have been, twisting scripture to justify their wicked and evil thoughts. However, there's a clear distinction between servitude, indentured servitude, and slavery. And don't forget that we don't look at what the church actually did to put people in different form of bondage if they didn't become Christianized and pay tithes. And I could go on some more, but I done did it again. I didn't mean to talk this long. I said I wasn't going to do another video this long, for a while when I did that first video of the year. And here it is, I did it again. But I'll go ahead and cut this one off, and I'll talk to you later. Love you guys. See you next time.